Agenda. The study session is an opportunity for the council and the staff to interact and discuss issues. We do not vote on any item. And they will be brought back at a later date for confirmation or vote. You're up.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Barrett and council members. I want to first of all thank you for coming in and having a special meeting of the council. We had a number of items sort of stacking up in the queue for your executive session, or excuse me, your study session, and I appreciate you coming in and spending the evening going over those items. The first one is an update and a review of the operation and functioning of your council policy subcommittees that you established a little over 2 years ago. As you know, Tammy Shreve from the Government Affairs Office oversees the administration for me and the executive group of the city in the operation of your policy subcommittee. So I've asked Tammy to spend just a few minutes going through a couple of slides that illustrate how the committees have been functioning, and then we want to turn it over to you and take your direction and answer any questions, of course, that you might have on the functioning of the committee. So, Tammy?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the subcommittees. My presentation will provide a brief overview of the policy. We're going to discuss the staff's role in the subcommittee process and also to review the activities of each subcommittee. The City Council began discussing the creation of subcommittees in June 2011. The purpose of the subcommittees is to review potential public policy items. In September 2011, the Council adopted the subcommittee policy and authorized 6 subcommittees, which are listed on your screen. The policy was amended in February 2012, and it consolidated the 6 subcommittees into 4. So Community Culture Subcommittee and Public Safety were combined into 1. General Government remained a subcommittee, Policy and Appointments remained a subcommittee, and Sustainable Development Subcommittee and Public Services was combined into 1. The subcommittee policy that was adopted also outlines the process for the subcommittees. 3 councilmen are assigned to a subcommittee. The selection of the council members takes place in January of each year. Each subcommittee elects a chairperson, and council members submit policy items to the city manager for placement on the subcommittee agendas. The city manager signs the agendas to the subcommittee based upon topic. So, for example, if an item is an environmental policy, it would be assigned to the Sustainable Development and Public Services Subcommittee. Policy items, when they go to a subcommittee, have basically two outcomes. The item could be a discussion, information item only, or it can be a discussion item that the subcommittee then sends to the study session council study session for further discussion and review. Council subcommittee meetings adhere to public meeting laws, and there are a couple of just administrative issues. We ensure that the entire council receives a council subcommittee agenda packet so everybody can read what is going to be taking place at each council subcommittee meeting. The subcommittees have a designated meeting date and time, and meetings are not held, of course, if there's no committee items. Staff plays an important role in this process. A deputy city manager, a department director, a city attorney is assigned as staff liaisons to each of the subcommittees. Council assistants prepare the minutes. The clerk office handles the public notices, except with the policy and appointment subcommittee, the clerk's office handles the minutes. Staff also performs analysis of all the policy issues that are being heard by the subcommittees. We prepare reports, we provide relevant information to the council members, and we develop presentations for the council subcommittee meetings. Here's an overview of the council items that the policy items that we've received. Since the inception of the policy, we have received 59 policy items, and you can see from this chart how they are distributed to the different subcommittees. For those of you that like pie charts a little better, here you go. You can kind of see how it equals out amongst all the different subcommittees, with Community Culture and Public Safety having 20, Sustainable Development, Public Services 18, General Government 7, and Policy and Appointments 14. Now I want to take a moment and then look at each individual subcommittee and the number of items that have been submitted. So for Community Culture and Public Safety, a total of 22 items have been submitted during this 2-year period. As you can see, the first quarter, there were 11 items submitted. The next 3 quarters, less items were submitted until October 2012. There have not been any items submitted since then. Policy and Appointment Subcommittee has had 14 items submitted, although a side note with that, one of the items is the boards and commission appointments. Excuse me. That is a reoccurring item, so that item's always on pretty much their agendas each month. The other 13 were one-time policy items that were discussed and decided upon. So as you can see, the first quarter there, 10 items were submitted, and then it went about a year without any items submitted, and then the last 3 quarters, 2 items, and then 2 one-items were submitted. General Government, 7 total items. First quarter, 5 items submitted, and then over a year passed, and we recently, from July to September 2013, had items submitted. Thank you. Sustainable Development and Public Services, a total of 18 items. Again, the first quarter, 13 items submitted, and you can see items submitted throughout the next 2 years, but not more than 2 items for each one of those points. This graph shows all the policy items that were submitted. Remember, there are 59 total. If you look at it, the first quarter, 39 of those were submitted. And since that time, not more than 5 were submitted per calendar quarter. And some of those show 1 item submitted per quarter. Here's the November schedule for the subcommittees. At this time, Sustainable Development and Public Services and Policy and Appointments have scheduled committee meetings. They all have items to review. Excuse me, the other 2 committees do not have any items to review and do not have meetings scheduled this time. At this point, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments? Ms. Garland?
Makes you think. Okay, well, I guess I'll just start from the beginning. I feel like we don't need the subcommittees as they stand today. There are some subcommittees that actually have real tasks, such as the boards and commissions, where we interview people to be volunteers for all of our various 22 boards and commissions. And then the second one is the not-for-profit subcommittee, where twice a year they meet for a 2 or 3 day period of time and interview not-for-profit or 501c3s.
If I can interrupt, it's once
Yes.
a year is the multi-day thing, but then it's also housing.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and that may come up at irregular intervals.
Okay, okay, so they have an actual task, a duty to accomplish. I believe that the other subcommittees, meeting when there might be a question or an issue, there's no reason for us to take all of the staff time, it's what, 5, 6, 7 staff members, all of the research in advance, all of the time to placate, if you will, a few members of the city council. Instead of making that presentation, if it's really viable and valuable to the council, it should be made to the council as a whole, so we can all benefit from all of that information. If there is a policy question, well, then that policy question certainly would be valuable for all of us to hear. I just don't understand the concept of taking some issues and dividing them out for 3 council members. And if it's a change in an ordinance or something like that, well, then all of us need to see where it starts, what amendments were made to make changes to it, and then how it morphs into something new, something that we all agree should be created out of the original state. So for all of those reasons, I don't really believe that subcommittees are something that we need in the city of Peoria. Another thing is there are other cities that maybe could use subcommittees, and Phoenix and their aviation subcommittee is a really good example of that. They have an airport. It's good to have a place where all of the aviation issues can come together to talk to some people who've become experts in that. They also have, 1.5 million people. We have 157,000 people. Most of them are not coming to our subcommittee meetings, and as a matter of fact, they're not even being exposed to them because they're not televised. So it becomes a lack of transparency, not only for the rest of the council members, but also for the general public. They are not hearing everything that's going on with our council. So for all of those reasons, it is my opinion that we maintain the boards and commissions and not policy and appointments, because again, policy should not be created by part of a city council. Boards and commissions where we can fill the vacancies on our volunteer boards and commissions, and then the not-for-profit where interviews can be done with the 501c3s as they come forward looking for grant funds. So those two, I think, should remain intact, and the others, I don't believe are necessary.
Ron?
Yeah, I think the subcommittees do serve a purpose, and I do want to make it clear that they are public meetings, and public can attend and has attended, so just like they do at any regular meeting. So it's not that we're doing something where the public doesn't have a chance to come to the meeting or read about the meeting. They're published minutes, right? And they become part of our website. I like them because it gives council members a chance, if they feel there's something important that we should look at. It's the first step, and then it does go from there to the entire council in a study session. So it's not as if it's only a few members deciding. It's a few members that may have a particular area of interest or concern, and they want it brought forward. And then it makes its way to a study session. If we just keep our current situation and a particular council member does have an interest in something being brought to a study session, he can request with the mayor, but if the mayor says no, then he has to have 3 other council members agree before it can be brought to a study session. With his current situation, then any council member can have something looked at, and we look at things that are of interest to our citizens. I know I've looked at our taxes, for example. We had a subcommittee on that, and I'm going to be moving forward at one of our next sessions to talk about some of the things that were discussed in that subcommittee. So I think they do serve a purpose, and I think we have the right number of them right now. I think 4 is good. One of those is, is a continuing one. The others actually have had a fair amount of interest. There was a lot of interest initially, and you can see the big steep climb because there were a lot of things that people hadn't had a chance to really talk about. Different council members hadn't had a chance to talk about. And since then it's leveled off, so it's not a heavy burden. It's not like we're doing many of them every month. They're just, they come up as there's a need to go into more detail and look at something, and the staff, if these, were first brought to a regular study session, would have to do the same amount of work. So it's not an additional burden in my mind on the staff. So I recommend that we continue with the subcommittees that we have. I think they're working well.
Could you go to the graph that shows the 59 and how it's distributed? Thank you. By the total. I think it was the third. Can you go to slide 10? Thank you.
No, it's 10, push 10, it'll go, that one?
No, keep going. The one was the bar graph that showed the same thing.
Okay. That was items submitted by quarter, the calendar quarter.
Yes, that's the one. No, there was another one that showed 59, and then how they were distributed over the years, over time. That's the one, thank you. Okay, other questions or comments? Carlo?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to add my 2.5 cents in here. I feel that we should we only have 4 now. We had 6, we're down to 4. And I feel that we should keep them this way here. If somebody has a problem with something, instead of trying to bring it to the study session right away, let's go to the subcommittee and talk about it. We cut it down twice, so I think that's enough. And if Kathy's worried about having a TV, we can have it here and be on TV, just like everybody else. So I would support keeping these four on the list. Thank you.
Thank you. I pretty much don't have a dog in this fight because I'm not a member of any of the subcommittees. But in terms of expenses to the city, in terms of employee time and preparation time and everything else, given the volume that is not there, I would recommend that we do away with these, because whatever item is a burr under somebody's saddle, they can bring it forward, we can do it as a study session. And we all expose all the information at the same time. That's my personal opinion. We haven't heard from you or you. Questions or comments?
I was never in favor of the subcommittees. I think it's necessary for us to keep boards and commissions. I think it's necessary for us to keep the not-for-profit. I think the other committees are, if we're looking at policy changes, correct me if I'm wrong, but nothing really happens in the subcommittee level that it doesn't come to a study session to full council. I see it being just another step in general government that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I've kind of mixed emotions. I think there's a need for some of them. I don't know that we need all four. Like Bob and Kathy were saying, I think probably two of them, the general government one, I sit on that one and or follow them, and I haven't seen much come out of that one. So that's one that I'm a little concerned about that may not need a need for it.
But you'd retain the other three.
I'm sorry?
You'd retain the other three.
Yeah, I think the other three I like.
Okay.
Can I make another comment?
Certainly.
Sorry.
Sorry, were you finished?
No, yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I have also some concerns about time. There is a staff issue, and I think it's extensive. I mean, when you have 4 or 5 or 6 staff members meeting for 2 hours, and besides that, all of the research that has to be done, and I have to say that the general government meeting that happened not long ago with regards to taxes was extensive, extreme and extensive, and it was basically a study session, but it was a study session for 3 council members. So I feel as if that information didn't happen to our entire council for some reason. And I feel like it was a huge use of staff time that wasn't applied to the council as a whole. I mean, we operate as a body, and we should all have the same amount of information, the same access to staff time, the same information should come to us at once. If you've got some questions and you want to ask a staff member, you're willing to go, it's available for you to go and meet with the director of budgeting or any staff member at any time. Make an appointment, go talk to them about whatever research you need to have. But to bring all of those staff members together and have all that research and all that time and all that expense for your own personal study session is, I think, an abuse of the system and in excess. And when I'm looking at some of the things that happened in the subcommittees through the years, here I am looking at items for discussion only that happened. So these are things that never became a policy issue, meaning they shouldn't have been hearing them at all anyway, and they never rose up to the point where they were discussed by the council as a whole, and nevertheless, it was a lot of staff time. So I'm looking at, just on one board, community culture, Veterans Board, feral cats, dirt, roadside memorials, all of these items were discussed within these subcommittees, but never came to the council as a whole. So that's information I never got to participate in. Permissible number of animals per residence. And that's just one of many. So I feel that what is happening is we are dividing our council. We are excluding certain council members from information in certain cases, and that's just the very least. I mean, we are supposed to be a policy-making body. If you've got questions about feral cats or dirt, you can certainly go and speak to that department during the course of any business day. But to make all of staff stay later and to have all that research on hand to be able to answer all of your questions for just part of the city council, I believe that it is an abuse of the system. We're supposed to act as a body, not as individuals or not as portions of a body. So for that reason, I really feel that we need to rethink subcommittees and certainly rethink the abuse of staff time and lack of information that can be shared with all council members.
Well,
Yeah, I might say that subcommittee, when they're discussed in subcommittee, they're supposed to make their way to a regular study session. And I guess that hasn't happened in all cases.
Some of the items, when they went to the subcommittees, were determined to be discussion only. The subcommittee listened to it, they discussed it, they didn't feel as though they wanted to take a policy after discussing the item to the full council. So I listed as informational discussion only.
But I believe it's the way the subcommittee is set up, they are supposed to go to a regular study session. Just because maybe the group didn't care for further consideration, they still are supposed to go according to the way we voted on the subcommittee structure.
I thought the subcommittee system was, if they thought it was worthwhile, it's sent forward.
Right.
But if at the subcommittee level, whatever was bothering them is not true, there's no point in bringing something up, saying, we don't agree with this, we don't like this, but now you guys all have to sit and listen too. You're defeating your own purpose.
Right, so I think in some instances...
But I think it's written that way.
But in some instances, I believe the council submitted an item that they wanted to look at the policy, potential policy. Staff presented information, the subcommittee reviewed the information, and at that point, after a thorough discussion, decided that's not something they wanted to put forward as a policy issue. So at that point, it's listed as information discussion only.
And keep in mind too, it's supposed to be policy issues. So if somebody raises a question and it turns out it's not a policy, then it doesn't go forward. Because you're only supposed to be discussing and recommending to the full council policy items, not ordinances.
Well, policy items are, can lead to ordinances.
Not all
They don't have
ordinances
to,
are policy
but,
items.
Well, I think the ones we had were policy issues.
But I think some...
And the city manager makes a determination whether it's a policy issue or not, right?
As under the way the council set out the policy regarding the functioning of the committees, issues, as Tammy outlined a few minutes ago, are submitted to me. And the way we administer them, they go to Tammy. She organizes them, brings them to me. And I look at them to see if they're policy issues. As those of you that were on the council at the time that council policy on subcommittees was approved, you'll remember the long discussion we had about what's a policy issue. Remember that? That was, for the two of you that were not on the council, you would think that would be kind of an easy question. But it actually isn't. And all across government, different bodies, different governments use different definitions of policy, we found. And so it's not always a black and white question as to what's a policy issue. We try to hone it down to make sure that the policy on the subcommittees is being followed, so that we're not having subcommittees that are talking about simple administrative functions, but rather you're talking about the policies, and we monitor the discussion to try to keep it on a policy endeavor. But as Tammy points out, from time to time, there's a discussion that doesn't end in the committee wanting to recommend a change in policy to the full council, in which case there isn't a further action. Now, there are a handful, a very small number, I think, 3 or 4, and Tammy, I think you have that, of items that were approved out of committees that have yet to be heard at study session. But much as we're doing tonight, we have a backlog in study session issues, as you know. And so there are a handful, and here they are. I guess there's 5 of them, that have been decided upon, or recommendations made, I should say, by the subcommittee that are in the queue for you to hear in your study session, and that, of course, is under the charter and our code, the prerogative of the mayor in terms of setting the agenda for the council meetings, including the study session. So these are items in the queue with a number of others awaiting scheduling for study session that have been decided upon by the subcommittees. Correct, Tammy? Am I saying this?
That's correct.
Yeah, Tammy's the day-to-day
Right. And also,
manager of this.
if I can add, when an item is submitted with an idea that, hey, this could be a policy, and maybe there's a policy item in this topic, so we review it, and at a subcommittee meeting, staff presents the information, and then the council members, as all three of them just agree that maybe this isn't a policy. It was a good concept, but it doesn't pertain to a policy. At that point, no one on the subcommittee wants to take it any further as an informational item. Now, if one council member wants to take it forward and there's a vote, it goes forward. And it can then go that it's unanimous, they all agreed to the policy, it should go forward, or if there's one council member that wants it to go forward, it will go forward. But when you see these informational items on the list, everyone decided that it was strictly an informational item. There was a discussion, it didn't seem like there could be a policy from it. It was a good discussion, they learned, and there's something that they, looked at, we looked at it, but there was an agreement by the committee not to go forward. So at that point, I listed it as information and discussion.
Kathy, and then Carla.
I believe our subcommittee system is broken. I do not believe that it is working. I think we're using it with the tax issue, a personal study session. I believe a lot of these items are things that can be resolved by talking to staff members instead of having all of this overtime and a lot of time when the entire council is not benefiting. And so I would like to suggest that we keep the boards and commissions and we keep the not-for-profit and we disband the rest of them and decide then from scratch if and how we want to put together a subcommittee, a workable subcommittee ordinance. This isn't working. It's not working for me, and I don't believe that it's working for our citizens, who very few of them, yes, it's available for them to show up. They can come, open the door, and walk in, but very, very, very few of them are ever coming. So obviously, it's a lack of transparency. I believe that our system's not working. So if we want to revise the policy, then that's something that we can certainly do, and I think that we should start fresh with it. But in the meantime, let's disband these that are not working and keep the two that we need. That's my suggestion.
Carla?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I have to disagree with Kathy. She's picked out all the ones that I brought up. And there's going to be another one coming up, too, and they're going to be there, so don't worry about it. But if Kathy's so concerned about it, she can come to the meeting, or we can have it on TV and she can watch it on TV. I think the system is working. I don't think it's too much work on the staff, because if I need something, I ask my council assistant, and just like that, he gets it. Everybody else has an assistant. Your assistant can do that. And my assistant don't have to work after 6 o'clock to get it. So I don't see there's any problem with the staff looking into it. It's not they'll work until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and like I said, they have assistants, and they can do it. So I think it's working well. If it's not broken, if it's not broken, why try to fix it? I think it's important that we keep it, and I think it's important to the constituents that we have it. And I would support keeping all of these on for the subcommittee. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Ames?
Yeah, how many citizens are at this meeting? Citizens often don't come to any of our meetings. I guess they can watch on television here, and maybe some are. And as Carlo mentioned, we could look at doing the subcommittees on television. And this is a chance to look at certain possible policy decisions to vote on, at kind of in a detailed kind of way, and they can move forward to the entire council. And as Carlo mentioned, anyone can come. We're all notified about each of the subcommittees, right? Yeah, you don't have to be a member of the official member of the subcommittee. You can come and join in. And I think it's a way of, I think it's there's a real efficiency here, because it's a way of looking at a lot of things and maybe not moving them forward, although I think technically it says that they all do move forward to a full study session. I think if we look back at the rules, I think it is operated a little differently. If none of the members of the subcommittee wanted to move it forward, it hasn't moved forward. But there are minutes from those, and anyone can look at those minutes, right? And
That's correct.
anyone
There's
on the
minutes from
council
each
are
meeting.
available. There's total transparency. It's not a behind the scenes. It's not an executive session. It's a specific session geared at looking at topics that are important to get information on and consider their feasibility for us to vote on, yes or no. And I think they've leveled, we had a lot of them the first quarter or two, right? A lot of them. That's because there was pent-up demand for discussing things that never had made their way to a regular study session. And so now there are fewer, so it's not as if we're doing 10, 20 of them every month, where some months there haven't been any, right? Or some quarters there haven't been any.
That is correct.
And other quarters, one or two. So I don't think it's a burdensome system, but if something does come up, it's a chance for a council member to get input from, formal input from city staff, and look at it with two other council members, and it can move forward from there. So I don't see that it's a burdensome system. In fact, maybe it's an efficient way of looking at more things than we have in the past looked at as representatives of citizens. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? We have a suggestion to revise this system. We'll see if we can reach consensus on whether or not to revise. If we don't reach consensus on revising the system, then it would stand as is. Okay, everybody understand that? Should we take a look at revising it? Yes or no?
Well, I have a question. In revising it, it's going to stay like it is for now until we revise it, or?
Well, that'll be my next question.
Okay.
Do you want to leave it in place until we get a study session where we talk about possibly revising it?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. So it'll stay in place as is for now. We will put it on a list to do a study session to take a look at revising the system. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Very good.
Which
Thank you, Tammy.
could include anything, right? It could include adding more.
Absolutely. If you want to add more, it's totally
I'm
up
not
to you.
recommending that.
Right. Next item?
Steve, could you join us?
I brought forward the next item, and it's about texting or doing any kind of messages and using your cell phone during meetings, both executive meetings and the regular meetings. I want Mr. Kemp to explain why this is not a good idea.
Mayor, Council, this actually
You
arises,
didn't go green. Okay, you're good.
this actually arises out of recently I was at the International Municipal Lawyers Association annual meeting, and one of the areas that we talked about was upcoming issues that were seen across the country in Open Meetings Act. And one of the issues is the whole issue of texting during executive sessions. And let's make this a little bit broader, not just texting, but the use of technology has changed. When I first started practicing law, we thought the big old clunky cell phones were as far as technology was going to go, and now we have tablets and smartphones, and you have smartphones that can basically do everything a computer does. And the problem that this creates is in a couple of areas. First, in executive sessions. in executive sessions, if there's texting or use of a tablet during the executive session, there's no way of knowing where that information is going. And as we all know, it's a violation of state law to release information from an executive session. There's been a number of jurisdictions across the country where councils have been investigated by the governing entity, in this case it would be the Attorney General in Arizona, for the release of information out of an executive session. And I really think that, again, this is really a council policy call, but it would certainly be my recommendation that the council ought to consider a policy that would prohibit the use of cell phones for texting, tablets for texting and emails during an executive session. Now, a second area that I really would ask that you give some thought to is that, again, everybody has cell phones and tablets, and there are cases across the country now of councils being cited for violation of the Open Meetings Act because council members will sit up on the dais and email themselves back and forth information versus doing an open discussion. I would tell you, I think that's directly contrary to the Arizona Open Meetings Act. The Arizona Open Meetings Act envisions that you're going to have an open discussion in an open public meeting. It really does not envision that you would email yourselves or text message yourselves on the dais about positions. And there are actually cases where council members have texted and said, do you believe this? This is not how I'm going to vote. And they're doing this by text versus having the discussion. And the second area that I would really encourage council to address would be the fact that while you're on the dais in an open public meeting, that it's you don't text, email, or somehow electronically communicate with each other. The idea is you communicate with each other through open session action on the dais. And I would really recommend both of these. We haven't had a problem in Peoria. This city's done outstandingly good, and I congratulate you as elected officials. In my 23 years here, we have only had one open meetings law complaint regarding doing things not on an agenda, and that one was found to be unfounded by the Attorney General. That's an exceptional record for a local government. I can't think of any other local government I've ever represented that has had that kind of an exceptional record. But I do think this is a problem area, and I bring it to you, and I brought it to the mayor because I think it's something that you should address. I would not wait and recommend that we wait until we have a problem. My recommendation to you is now is the time to address this and make sure we don't have a problem for the future. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions, and what I'm looking for is any guidance council can provide on how you'd like to proceed.
Mr. Haynes?
Yeah, I think we should have some resolution on this. The exception would be I could still text Angela Merkel, right, in Germany? I could.
Yes. Well, I can't tell you that the NSA won't be looking at your text and computer messages. Unfortunately, those folks, if they can listen to the Chancellor of Germany and the President of Mexico, they may be listening to you too. But I think that we'll just have to leave for another day, and perhaps the Congress will address that. I think we can certainly deal with the texting side of it.
Humor aside, how would we enforce this? I have an iPad here. I don't know, maybe I could text on this, could I?
You can send emails on your iPad
I
to
could
each
send
other.
an email here, you're right.
Yeah,
So
you could
it's
send
the
an email.
Same thing, right?
Yes.
So, but I have this right here,
Yes.
and I was recommended that I have this rather than a hard copy, and
I think the iPads are great. I think lots of cities use iPads. I think the day is going to come when probably none of us will really have hard copy paper at all. I certainly don't within our office. I think that's fine. The issue is the electronic communication between you versus the open communication back and forth.
so it would just be a violation if we did.
I would really, if you started by communicating with the mayor and saying, Mayor, why don't we vote this way, and you're doing it by an email, that would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act, and I think it creates a problem.
Yeah, using your iPad to read your agenda is perfectly acceptable.
Absolutely.
It would just be unacceptable to send a message using your iPad.
During the meeting.
during the meeting.
Right,
During the meeting,
during the meeting.
right.
Yeah, while you're at the
Or the
dais.
executive session, whichever it was. That's what the policy,
There's will be study session and regular.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, anytime that we are meeting as a council, I think what the policy should say is you cannot text nor send emails. It's just pretty much that simple. And that protects us in terms of Open Meeting Act. And if you start sending emails to Kathy, and he sees that, he can report you, and that's violation of Open Meeting Law. I mean, we sit close enough to each other, we can pretty much monitor each other if that's one of your concerns. You can pretty much monitor each other, but I think to have that policy there, to have it very clear, I think is very important for this council.
Maybe it even could go a little further. I could have my camera here and send something to YouTube.
Well, there's that too.
And this
Yeah.
can become
Yeah,
even
Electronic communication, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll draft something and send it to you if that's
That
where
covers
council wants to
everything,
go.
Even
But it
if
can
it's
become even more problematic. You can
unrelated.
have council members, instead of taking public testimony, they simply communicate by email using their iPad or whatever to a constituent and say, tell me what you think about this item that's in an open session item. There's no record by the clerk of that communication. It's just simply being done. And, I mean, how far this can go and the problems it can create is many times, not in this jurisdiction, but other jurisdictions, I've known of council members who've said, well, I have a private email address. Don't even send it to my city email address. Send it to my private email address in the event that there's a public records request. So maybe nobody will know about it. And let's not do any of that here. But all of those types of things are how you can get into problems. And so my recommendation, if council is agreeable, is I'd like to bring you back, and I'll send you out in draft form for all of you to look at, some policy language on this topic. And then once I sense that there is, after I've gotten all your comments and things, I'll bring you back a red line draft for the council to discuss as a regular session agenda item.
Okay. So the question is, shall we go ahead and move forward with this?
I assume actually if we did it right now, it would be a violation, right? But you
Yes,
want
if
to
you-
formalize it.
I think we should have it in your policy. If you did it right now, it'd be a violation. I think it would behoove you to just make this as part of your policy, because the reality of it is, at the end of the day, council judges the qualification of its members. The city attorney is nor the city manager nor any other city official. It's not appropriate for us to, in essence, act as the policeman, so to speak. It's really, this is a rule that you yourselves need to have as a governing body and among yourselves, and that's why I would recommend it.
Yep, and I certainly agree with that recommendation.
Has any other municipality adopted this kind of a policy?
I don't believe that in Arizona they have. Across the country, a number of municipalities have. And this has become a big problem across the country. I can tell you, in talking to other city attorneys in Arizona, all of us are dealing with the same issue, because all of us have had, quite honestly, there's a number of cities that have had council members text from the dais, and as city attorneys talk, all of us kind of cringe and because we are thinking, okay, this is going to be giving us a letter from the Attorney General's office that we really don't want to have. And-
Well,
And
and
also,
if
it
I'm-
sort of taints, it makes the city look bad to do that. I mean, you may or may not be doing any city business. You might be telling your spouse, I won't be home till 10 o'clock.
Yes.
Because these other guys won't shut up. But, that's innocent. There's nothing wrong with that. But the fact that you are typing email messages or your text messages in public view and nobody knows what that says, it looks bad. I think we should be the first city to adopt this policy.
I agree.
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that this policy includes, it differentiates between regular open session and executive session. I mean,
Yes.
just like our rules are much more stringent when we are in executive session, I think they should be with our electronics also. And that would possibly even include turning our telephones off.
Absolutely. I would tell you in executive session, as your lawyer, I can't strongly advise enough. I absolutely advise you, do not text, do not email, do not engage in any kind of electronic communication in an executive session. I have indicated to the mayor that if I see it, I intend to interrupt the council, respectfully, of course, and ask you to stop if I see a council member doing it. It is a huge problem in an executive session, and I strongly, strongly discourage that you do that, and I would certainly can word the policy to reflect that in the executive session.
Carlo, you all right with that? You all right with that?
Yeah.
Okay. You're all set. Thank you.
Thank
Very
you,
good.
Mayor.
Thank you. Steve, if you can stay there for the next item, too. There's a legal issue embedded in the logo question, but
That's
I've
the next item
also
I will.
asked our communications director, Bo Larson, to come up on this issue. And before we get to kind of the legal question that I know the mayor had asked, I asked Bo to give a couple of slides on what our logo and our seal are, refreshing the council's memory on the last presentation you made about how we manage the use of that through graphic standards and so forth. And then Steve has some comments he wants to make with respect to the legal question.
Mayor and council members, thank you for this opportunity to discuss with you the history, evolution, and usage of our city seal, and the importance of making this graphic an official city seal for the city of Peoria. Just to give you a little history of this, in June 1954, after the city of Peoria was formed, the town attorney was authorized to create a town seal. So in September of that year, a contest was held with local Peoria High School students to come up with a design which the city would use. On December 14th, 1954, the city council selected the city seal and gave the top two winners $25, a lot more expensive these days to have produced. And the selected seal was designed by David Jimmy Montoya, who many of you still recall. The look of the seal, designed by Mr. Montoya, has been in use by the city ever since 1954. In 2012, the Office of Communications developed the city's first graphic design standards. Since graphic design standards are the cornerstone of all communication efforts, it benefits the city when the standards are applied with consistency and purpose to convey one clear message. Consistency builds a unique, recognizable presence that embodies a promise to the general public, as well as internally within an organization's employees base. Exceptions to these guidelines must be approved by the City of Peoria's Office of Communications. To help the city protect its look, if you will, we hired a graphic, I apologize. Well, we hired a graphic designer. Last year, Mike Iverson designed more than 400 items for the city, which I feel are highly professional and have developed a brand or a consistent look and message for the city. As you can see on this slide, part of the process of our graphic design standards development was to optimize our city seal, which we've had since 1954. As you can see from the original version on the left, the old seal, we cleaned up the lettering, increased the dimensions of some of the elements, enhanced the color, and actually corrected the direction in which the sun shined and reflected. The revisions have helped the seal reproduce better on documents and shirts and make it easier to read, all while maintaining the look and intent Mr. Montoya and our city founders envisioned. Using the colors from the original seal, we developed a palette of colors which are used throughout our graphic design standards. These colors help to define a look for the city of Peoria in all that we communicate. As well as an example here of some of how we used fonts in conjunction with our city seal, and this maintains a consistent look between all city departments and programs. And the graphic design standards also demonstrate the do's and don'ts in the usage of our city seal. As you can see, there's quite a few don'ts. Again, to promote the integrity and value of our city seal. And to give you a few examples of the correct and consistent use of our seal for communicating items such as city advertisements, banners, and signage. You can see that throughout all that we produce. But the seal is also used with other organizational promotional items, but only when the city is a sponsor of the event or on a shared communications item which is approved by the Office of Communications and the city department working with the outside organization. So that was a brief overview of the evolution of the city seal and how it's being used. So Steve's here now to talk about the importance of having the ordinance to make a city seal official.
Mayor, Council, following up with what Boa said, first, sometimes there's a bit of confusion in terms of, we hear terms seal, logo thrown around. I want to make clear, the city seal, when we talk about the city seal, what we're talking about is an official item that we use to authenticate city documents, city records. It's basically used for that purpose. Now, we have a second definition that you'll find in most jurisdictions, which is a logo. And a logo can be a seal. In many places it is. But a logo is something that's really more used to identify the programs, functions, brand. It's something far greater than the seal. I think sometimes people get confused between the two, and so for tonight, I'm going to use the term seal and logo somewhat interchangeably, but I want you to understand that they're two very distinct things. Now, many cities across the country have codes regulating the use of their city seals and logos. And the main purpose for that is because when you see that seal, or you see that seal as a logo, it's perceived as this is the city. If you see it on a poster, you're thinking this is the city. If you see it on a banner, you're thinking this is the city. And the fact is that in today's world of ease of reproduction, literally anyone can get a graphic and reproduce the seal, and right now we don't have any means to regulate this. And I can tell you over the years I've been here, this has been a problem. I can think of 3 different councils that have had this issue come up of people using the city seal and perhaps identifying something as city, which really, the council never really said, gee, this was city. And so at this point, the difficulty is we don't have any regulations. And in your packet, I gave you 4 different concepts. Some cities just do this as part of their graphic standards. Some do this as part of their web page. The concept that I think actually has some merit is what Orange County, Florida. Orange County, Florida is the home of Orlando and Disney World. Orange County actually has code provisions, and a number of other cities across the country have code provisions that govern the use of their city seals and logos. And basically, what they provide for is that for other than city activities, and that you have to get the city's permission to use the city seal or city logos. And that that the city can actually go to court and stop that use if you don't have the city's permission. And it basically is just a provision that says you need to get the city's permission. I did take the Orange County ordinance, and just to give you a look of what a Peoria-tized version, so to speak, of that would look like, that's also included in your packet. That's certainly just there as a reference item. It's not to say this is what you should adopt. It's more to provide a reference item, and what I'm looking for is some guidance in how council would like to approach this issue, if at all. Certainly there are some cities, as I mentioned in the council communication, that have no rules. I think it does quite honestly create an issue, because right now, if entities wish to reproduce the city seal and use the city seal, there's literally nothing that the city can do to prevent that. And the thing is I think Mr. Larson can tell you, certainly from an advertising and communication standpoint, when people see that seal, they are thinking, this is the city of Peoria. And so the question now I bring to you is, I'm looking for your direction on how you would like to approach this issue.
Okay, a little explanation on this. I asked this to come forward because of exactly that. When an affiliate event takes place that the city doesn't control and the logo is used, the people attending that event think it's the city that did it, even though the city might have had little or nothing to do with it. And my concern is that people blame the city. They don't blame the event organizer. They blame the city. So I think we should find a way to restrict the use of our logo on non-city sponsored, directly city sponsored events. And I'm guilty of that. In last March, we put on a golf tournament through my Lions Club and the benefits all went to the city, the Center for the Blind. And I contributed money to it, so I was one of the sponsors. And they put the logo on the golf shirts that they gave away. Now, that shouldn't happen, because if anything had gone wrong there, or anything bad had come out of that, aside from the donation to the Center for the Blind, people would have thought it was the city that did it.
Right.
It wasn't, it was the Lions Club. And it's that misdirection that concerns me, that if any event where our logo is used and we didn't sponsor that event, I mean, seriously run that event, we get blamed for anything that might go wrong. And I would like to find a way to control the use of that on non-city sponsored events so that we don't get a blowback. And that's kind of why I asked this to come forward and let's take a look at this. So it's less the look of the logo, although I really approve of that. That's very nice. I'm concerned about the use of the logo.
Yeah. And Mayor and Council, that's one of the important features of the Office of Communications, to screen things such as that, not necessarily your event.
Okay, but see, no, that's the problem.
But that's how we should.
I decided to donate money to put on this golf tournament for the Center for the Blind, and you're going to tell me no?
Well, I would work with the organizer, though, to explain how the proper use of the seal would be, because that's a perfect example. That should not be the primary use of our seal or logo in that event. And there's other organizations that sometimes that we may be a part of, but they want to put us high on the pedestal.
Exactly.
And I have to find out, well, how are we going to be used? Because not only is it a visual where people can say that's a City of Peoria event, it's also worth a lot of money. It's valuable. People can say, well, gee, the City of Peoria is putting this on, so I think there's an opportunity to get more fundraising dollars for it.
Exactly. That's why it's used. I mean, going back to the golf tournament, that'll happen again this March, rather than use the City of Peoria logo, they can say sponsored by Mayor Bob Barrett. And then you don't use the city logo.
Correct.
You know, if you want to do something like that.
Or another collateral. We can be with other sponsors as well.
Yeah, or, right, it's a collateral thing with other sponsors, but not just a standalone logo.
Right.
Or one we're not directly involved in. And I don't know if we can do that in terms of an ordinance.
I think you can. I think we can certainly provide that where, for example, I think we can draft an ordinance that where the city is jointly sponsoring an event, that then obviously the city could city logo or city seal could be used. I think what you're really getting to is, Mayor, is that if the city is sponsoring the event, then at least we know, okay, we're involved with it. If we're not sponsoring the event, then we know that if the city seal is being used, the perception is that I think the city is certainly sponsoring that event. And so I think this can certainly be drafted to provide that we define, okay, if the city's sponsoring an event, and by sponsoring, I think that means the city's an official co-sponsor of the event. And the city, so we understand, the city means the city as an entity.
Not individual councilmen.
So we all understand each other. You function as a body. You have individual public officials. You have duty as city council members, and in that capacity, you hold an individual public office. But you function as a body, and sometimes that gets really blurred. I have to tell you as a lawyer, you kind of wear two hats, and sometimes it's hard even for me to figure out exactly how those hats fit. But I think that's certainly something we can do here.
Okay, that was my concern. I was going to say, comments from the council, Mr. Ames?
Yeah, maybe you're just talking about this, but I know a few times I have used some district funds for the Friends of Transit, and they hold a Maricopa-wide meeting for a day. It's well-attended by all cities and so forth, and they put the sponsors up there, and, Scottsdale's up there, and Phoenix is up there, and their logos are there, and Peoria's logos. Is that what you're just talking about? That would be acceptable?
I think that would be acceptable. I think the answer here would be, take, for example, a sponsored event we'll have perhaps a Peoria Neighborhood Institute that has no affiliation with Peoria at all. It's just some groups of neighborhood activists. And not that there's anything wrong with neighborhood activists, but there's absolutely no connection. And they're putting on a neighborhood seminar, and they invite George Soros and Ted Cruz to speak. And both are very well-known personalities, very interested people. Now, would the
Certainly
city
lately.
want to necessarily have its logo used by those individuals and by that type of event? I think you might, as a council, want to say, we want to talk about this. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but we don't want somebody just saying, well, because it's out there, let's just grab the logo and use it and have Peoria's imprint on it. And that would be the type of event where, no, you couldn't use the logo or seal without coming to the council and having the council give you the consent to do that. But things like district funds, yes.
Let me follow up a little bit. I know one of our council members who isn't here, Tony Rivero, he's done a few fiestas, and he has a not-for-profit that's involved, but he's also involved as a council member. Would he be able to use the logo? And I think you sent us an email saying that that would be the case.
I think that's a question I think the council has to discuss is, I think certainly when you're using district funds, I think sometimes there's a perception by council that when you're using district funds that maybe that isn't like city, and so we just disabuse everyone of that. When you're using district funds, you're using city money. You are the city. And so I think to the extent you're using district funds, it's city. Now, when you have say you have a private not-for-profit, and it's just doing an event in a city building, and there's no district funds being used, no city money whatsoever. It's just a private not-for-profit and maybe an educational institution doing something in a city building. Is that city? At the end of the day, you're the folks who have to decide that question. But if it isn't city, then do you want the city and local being used? And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's really a policy call. But the question becomes, if we take an issue like that, do you want your city and local being used? If you do, great. If you don't, but at this point, if you ask me as a lawyer, can you use the city and local? I have to say, there's nothing that it's not copyrighted. It's not restricted. There's nothing that I can do to prevent anyone from using the city and logo.
Yeah. Could you back up a slide or two?
Yes.
I'll tell you when to stop. That's good right there.
Mm-hmm.
In that case where you're just using district funds and it's not a city event, I would have no objection at all to the one on the right here where you have that collection of logos and sponsors at the bottom. I only have a problem with it when the only one that's really showing is the city seal, even though maybe I just donated $1,000. For example, I'll continue with myself. Desert Harbor has this Christmas parade where they decorate their platform boats and they drive them around. And sometimes I donate to a program like $50 or $100. Well, in that case, they should not be able to use the logo, even though it's a district fund, because the city has nothing to do with that. So if one of those guys goes out there and sinks, everybody's going to say, oh, it's the city's fault, or the city's liable, when we had nothing to do with it. That would be my concern. But if we're one of a collection of sponsors, to group them all down at the bottom like that, I don't have any problem with that.
Correct.
Personally, I mean, in terms of what you're talking about, Ron. So, I mean, you use your district funds, and it's just your district funds as opposed to a city event. If you are one of multiple contributors, yeah, I wouldn't have any trouble with dropping the city logo on that. But if you're the only one, I don't think, and you're only dropping $1,000 on it, no, I don't think you should be able to do that. Because again, it implies, the one in the middle, the festival in the plaza, implies that this is a city event. I mean, you look at that, there's no sponsor on that other than us.
What event was that?
The one in the middle, festival in the plaza, on the screen in front of you. The only logo is at the bottom, in the center, it's the city of Peoria. I don't know how much money we put into that, but that was not a direct city-sponsored event.
Okay.
But you look at that, and if you go to that and you're not happy with that, you think it was a city event. That's kind of what I'm driving at. We got to find a solution
But the
to prevent this kind of thing.
The draft here says officials, employees, and divisions and departments may use the city logo with the proper express written approval of the city manager or his or her authorized designee.
I'm trying to, I'm trying to point out a flaw in that ordinance. And one thing, when he brings it back, I'd like to see corrected. Try to prevent this festival in the plaza, I'll get to you in a minute, festival in the plaza thing where you have one logo, only one logo, when it wasn't our event. This was a private event. It was sponsored. They used the Centennial Plaza out here.
This is coming up, right?
But if you look at this invitation, it was a city event.
And Mayor and Council, that is the gray area, though. This was done through community services, part of our relationship. And so that's part of the judgment call we make in like, okay, city, community services is producing this with this private vendor.
I understand, but that's still my
Correct.
concern. If you look at the invitation on the right and the invitation on the left, we're one of multiple logos. No problem. You look at the one in the middle, we didn't do this directly. The only logo on there is us. And that tells me, as if I pick that thing up, it was a city event.
Correct.
And that's the impression I'd like us to find a way to fix.
And certainly you would have, under like, for example, the draft, you would have the ability, if you thought that there was an event that was so suitable that you wanted the city's endorsement to be imprinted on it, that council could give it that approval.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you're not basically saying never, you're just saying it has to come to council and you have to get that approval out of council before you do it.
I'm sorry, I jumped into the middle. Did you have any other comment?
Yeah, well, whatever we do here, I don't think it should be always coming to the council. We should have a policy that allows certain things, and I think if a particular council member is actively involved, and I'm thinking of Mr. Rivero, who's not here, and he worked with the city, right, and so the city was quite involved as well, that should be permitted.
Right, and I think if you look at, for example, the Fiesta Peoria event, that was an event that the city, it was an affiliate event that the city provided funding to. I think that is, there's a difference between, for example, that event, in terms of how you might look at it, versus an event that was with an educational institution and a not-for-profit foundation that was simply using city property. I don't think that the issue of, I think Fiesta Peoria is different than some other events that might exist. And so I think Fiesta Peoria is obviously different than an event where perhaps you have a speaker come and work with a not-for-profit and an educational institution and speak. I think all of those, this is a hard thing to quantify. I would tell you as the lawyer, it's a very hard thing to quantify, but I think you can certainly look at things such as city funding. City funding is certainly a difference. You can look at, is it something that the city has, as part of its budget process, indicated it's going to sponsor or it's going to affiliate with, versus, and certainly you always have the power, assuming you write the code this way, to give yourself the ability to consent, even if it doesn't meet these requirements. But I think it's possible to write the code to make clear certain things are not, and the things that are not, if you want to use the city logo, you're going to have to convince the city council that, yes, you should be able to use it.
Yeah, I think if it's an outside institution coming here and doing their thing, and they pay some rent to use our buildings, right, or our fields, I would think they would want to use their logo anyway, but...
Well, and I think,
Yeah.
you know...
But if it's tied to the city through a council person, I think that's something different, particularly when that council person works with the city to...
Bill?
Just a curiosity question, Mr. Kemp. If a brochure goes out using the city seal, and we didn't approve it, is there any liability to the city? That's my first question. The second question is, would having an ordinance where you'd have to secure approval from the city, would that lessen any liability that the city has?
There's always a risk here when the city seal's out there that the perception is that the city has somehow participated. Obviously, I'll tell you as a lawyer, if we haven't participated, we're going to make that the cornerstone of our defense. But there's always that perception. If you have an ordinance, I think it absolutely lessens any perception and any possible liability, because the first exhibit is, hey, this doesn't comply with our code, and because it doesn't comply with our code, it doesn't meet those requirements. And from a legal standpoint, it certainly improves our position, no question.
Kathy, and then Carla.
Yeah, my questions and comments center around the financial implications and placement, because here is a brochure or a flyer from Westmark, and as you can see, they have all of the sponsors in one place, and it clearly says sponsors, participating sponsors, and then it has all the logos of those sponsors. So there's no implication that the city of Peoria is hosting this event or is doing anything other than being one of the sponsors.
Which one is that, Kathy?
This is Westmark, Best of the West Awards.
You want to pass it around?
Oh, sure. On the other hand, this is an invitation to an event by a private entity that used our logo at the top, and it could have been used for fundraising purposes. So people may have easily thought that they were donating funds that would have been going into city coffers.
This is the Westmark
And,
annual.
and in actuality, they were going to this private foundation's coffers. And so the implication is financial and it's false. And I think that it gives definitely the wrong impression. And then you have, you want to pass that around? Something like this, which was a private entity, and they put our logo on the back as if we produced this.
Well as designed to look like the city graphic standards.
The entire front and back of this is our logo.
Which one is that?
You can pass it around.
West.
The grayed out logo, there's our logo, close up, and then here is our logo on the back, so that it looks as if we produced it. And yet all of the funds that were given from supporters of this event did not come to the city. They went to this private entity. And so now we're talking about financial implications that appear to be one thing and in reality are another thing. It's as if our logo was used to raise funds. And I think that that puts us in a very bad situation, and whoever utilized it in this way, I'm sure they didn't do it intentionally, but it certainly put them in a bad situation where it appears as if they were doing it for that purpose.
Well, Mayor and Council and Councilmember Carlott, our seal is a valuable asset to the city. It's not only the brand, it's the official stamp of approval by the City Council and the city. And as I mentioned before, when you see the seal out there, especially as a standalone or being used by other organizations, it can be used as part of the fundraising aspect of that organization.
And so if something is not brought before the council and sanctioned as a council as a whole, our body chooses that to be a City of Peoria event, and someone is using our logo in this event, it appears as if we did sanction it. And so, I don't know, maybe to err on the side of caution, these things should come before the council, and we should decide what events we want to sponsor. Because I'm sure nobody else wants to be put in a situation where they are appearing as if they were doing something fraudulent.
Okay. Carla?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. A few questions. Number one, Steve, you've been here for 100 years. Have we ever had,
Really?
have we ever had a problem, anybody suing us with the seal because we put it on?
No, we've never had a lawsuit arising out of.
When talking to the mic, please,
We've never had a lawsuit arising out of use of the city seal. I can tell you, I recall 2 other conflicts with entities where entities used the city seal on things that the council, the different councils said, well, gee, that's not really what we supported, and we're being identified with something we didn't support, but we've never been sued over it.
We've never been sued by using the seal.
Yeah.
For anybody. Now, if a private company wants to come in and use a seal, they can't do it unless they get the approval from the council, right?
Right now, there's nothing I could do if a private entity came in and used the seal. It's not copyrighted, it's not trademarked. I could write them a strongly worded letter saying, knock it off and don't do this. But right now, there's really nothing that the city can do.
Now, on flyers, if I send out flyers for a neighborhood meeting, am I allowed to use a seal?
Yes.
Because, I always call you up and I make sure, I say, I'm going to have a meeting, can I use a seal? And you always say yes.
And you would be
So-
able, whether you adopt regulations or not, if you adopted regulations, that would be a council member officer activity, you as a public officer, and yes, you would be able to use the seal or a city logo. And for purposes of this, again, we're talking about seal, but keep in mind, we're really meaning the whole gamut, seal, logo, everything.
Do we have many events that we use a seal that's not the city?
There are events that happen in the city that we may be sponsors of in one aspect, either as in-kind or financially, and those are ones that we question. And I would reach out to John Sefton or even Carl or Steve if I feel it's really in the gray zone. But there are events such as the Grill Fest, for example, which isn't necessarily a City of Peoria event, but we're partnering with Channel 8 to do that. And as you can see on that one, there's many sponsors involved with that.
Now, the event that I had and that Bill had, that was a city event.
Yes.
And it was okay to use a
Yes,
seal
yes.
on that.
Those were city events, those were put on, I believe, by the Community Services Department. Those seal, logo, those just city events. There's a difference between, I would submit those and other types of people using the city seal or logo, where the question is what's the connection with the city? But those were clearly city events.
So that Grill Fest is a partnership with somebody on the Grill Fest?
It's a partnership, and it's a city event too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm happy just the way it is, because I never use a seal unless I ask Steve, and Steve knows that, so I really don't have a problem, just leave it the way it is. Thank you.
Let me see if I can bring us to some sort of resolution here. I think unfettered, unrestricted use of the seal is a bad thing for the city. You read about the Williams gang, they come through Sun City with bad roofing, once a year, and they're a fraudulent group. They could run around with our seal and there's nothing we can do about it. They're committing crimes, and they can commit that crime and put our seal on their truck, and we can't stop that. So obviously, we need to have some kind of controls over the use of the seal, / logo, whatever you want to call it. I would suggest that we let Steve go back and try to draft an ordinance. He can circulate it to us, we can mark it up, send it back, and we'll bring it back to another study session and see if we can develop an ordinance that will help the city control the seal's use. Everybody all right with that? Go ahead, Ron.
If you want to do that, I think this document does that, but it does say that other than officials, employees, and divisions and departments of the city, they may use the logo, just as Councilmember Rivera has, and I think Councilmember Carlett, were you involved with the Grill Fest there? No? Okay, but, some of these are not strictly city things. There are others involved, and if there are others involved, I think that's fine. So I don't want to see one comes back and prohibits a council member from getting involved in events and bringing in nonprofits as a part of the way to pay for them. I think that's a savings for the city, and it's a good recognition for the city to have those kind of events. Now, I do agree that a strictly outside entity using our logo. And we can draft this, but that isn't necessarily going to stop them, right, Steve? They could still use our logo.
Well-
And I don't know if we'd have any more legal way of punishing them just because we had this document. but-
This would give us the ability to actually go to court and seek injunctive
Okay,
relief against that. What I heard the council talk about in terms of looking at this would be to, A, make sure we, intergovernmental type sponsors, things like Best of the West, that's clearly an acceptable use, and I think that can easily be addressed. And then also the question of generally that the city should have some control over size. That, for example, taking the advertisement in the middle, that the logo, the advertisements on the right and left, the logo is proportioned to the size of other logos. I understood, I think that there was some concern that if on the advertisements to the right and left, if the city logo was 3 times the size of everybody else's, that might be an issue versus having it essentially in line with everybody else's. And those were the 2 areas I heard council thought that should be addressed here.
I didn't quite follow that. Where is it different? The one
Well,
just
if you
has the
look-
one logo.
If you look at the right and left advertisements, you'll see that the city seal is sized essentially the same as other
Right.
logos. As I understood the council discussion, there might be some concern if on the right or the left, that the city seal was, say, 3 times the size of everybody else's.
But it isn't in these cases.
But it isn't.
Okay.
And that would just be how regulating, making sure that it's essentially sized in appropriately with everyone else.
When it's co-sponsored.
Yes, as a co-sponsor.
Carla?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Steve, let me ask a couple of questions. Have we ever had, like Bob says, somebody go to Sun City with our sale? Have we ever had anybody doing that?
I'm not aware of anyone outside the city. I've never had any kind of complaint from anyone outside the city. The 2 cases I recall over the years, both with entities that were somehow not necessarily connected, but they were not-for-profit entities. But no, we've never had somebody like go out in the Sun City and use the CO to the best of my knowledge.
So going back to what Bob said, if they did do it, they're using our seal without getting the okay from us, could we sue them?
Okay, right now, we'd have virtually no way of doing much about it because we don't have any code provision. It's not trademarked, it's not copyrighted. Essentially, there's been a couple of cases. There was one time a entity that was actually sending out requests for early ballots that had no affiliation with the city, and it actually had the city seal on it. And the only thing I could do was just write them a letter saying, knock this off, don't be doing this. But if they had said, well, city attorney, that's really nice, but we're going to do it anyways, there would not have been anything we could have done about it.
My only concern is that if we put an event on, it's not really by the city, but it's a council person, and I would hate to say to Ron or Kathy or even you, no, you can't use a seal. That would be my only concern because you're involved, and maybe Kathy be involved. Now, she's not involved in this, so I don't think you are. But that's what I'm saying. If anybody's involved, John or Bill or myself, that we want to use a seal, they come to the council and you say, no, you can't use it. That would bother me.
I understand that, but we still need, the reason I'm asking him to go out and bring us back a draft ordinance, we can bring up those issues once we see all of it. But we do have to have some control over our seal now. Because as he just told you, I could go out and put it on my car, and I could go off and go into another city and solicit funds, personal funds, and they think maybe I'm with the city. Well, I would be. Let's say it wasn't me, but my neighbor could do that, put the city seal on his car, and go off to Sun City and try to raise money.
Did you look in your car lately?
No, but I'm really worried about that garage. So my suggestion is that he bring us back a draft ordinance. We can all send in our corrections and our fixes and what we think about it, as we're doing with the special events thing now, and we'll bring it back for another study session. And then individual concerns or pieces you don't like, we can then raise and discuss at that time, rather than try to talk about them now.
I'm wondering, with this current draft, don't we already have the protection, and it does allow individual council members to get involved with other entities?
Councilmember Ames, I think it certainly goes a long way. I did hear the two comments. My suggestion to you, particularly in light of the fact that we don't have one council member here, would be I'd be happy to take this current draft with a new CC for a study session and address the two issues I heard being referenced, and then send that back to you. And I would expect that maybe we would have all 7 of you there, and this does affect all 7 of you, and I could certainly see some. From my standpoint as a drafter, I would certainly like to have Councilmember Rivera's input as well. And so I think it does go a long ways, and I think I can certainly put this back, and this can come back to you in a study session at your earliest convenience.
So, yes or no?
Yes, but I'm happy with that the current document does that.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to see it back.
Yeah, he will do that, and he'll bring it back. Okay?
Yes. Mayor, I think I have number 5, but
you
can
do
we
have
have a
number-
short recess? I need to.
Oh, go ahead, Jacob?
I just had a quick question, more for clarification. So if the city ordinance is passed, what legal action does that give us against people who use?
We could, file an action. The municipal court is seeking to impose a civil penalty, or we could actually go to Superior Court and seek injunctive relief, where the court would issue an injunction, which is actually a court order prohibiting any use of this, and the person then could be held in contempt of court by a judge for violation of the court order.
Okay. And then beyond just the city ordinance, is there a possibility of like copyrighting or trademarking to go beyond the ordinance?
We do copyright a number of things. The difficulty in copyrighting like a city seal or city is that there's what we call the fair use doctrine, and it becomes very, very difficult to copyright that because of the fair use doctrine, which is a provision in copyright law saying that certain things can't be copyrighted because they're generally used. And that's why, like, for example, state government and federal government have very similar types of provisions in their laws, because you run into an issue with copyrighting it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, don't go away, you're next.
If the city attorney would like a quick break, Julie Ayers
Okay.
we can swap the last 2 items, Mayor,
fine with me.
and Julie can do the next one, and then Steve can come back. Okay.
The wellness program?
Yeah, and this, while Julie's coming up, this is an update. There's no real direction necessary from the council on this issue, but it's quite a long time since we have been able to give you an update on the city's wellness program, and I know it's something that the council's interested in. So Julie's prepared with a few slides to update you on the program.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Situate. I'm pleased here tonight to speak to a wellness update, but I wanted to give a little bit of brief information about our health insurance trust first and kind of set the stage. The City of Peoria is self-insured and offers health insurance and related benefits to almost 3,000 covered lives between our employees and their dependents. It is a large operation. We have a city expense of $14.2 million budgeted for this year, and employees contribute another $2.5 million to the program. So there's a lot of money that also runs through this enterprise. We do have a 5-member trust board that's been appointed by City Council, who's responsible for administering and overseeing this trust, and they rely heavily, of course, on City's professional staff and our consultants. A little bit more information about the details on our health insurance options. We do currently have approximately an 80-20% split with our employees for the cost of insurance, with the city picking up about 80%, the employees picking up about 20%. Our employee-only coverage on our most popular plan is about $54 per month, and our most popular plan for a family of 2 or more is about $308 a month. Those are pretty competitive, but as you're aware, these are costs that continue to rise each and every year. I also wanted to spend just a moment talking about the Affordable Care Act and its impact on our health insurance program and also our wellness program. You can't listen to the news or read the internet or do anything these days without seeing the newest kind of drama with regard to this program. And it is important because it does have daily impacts on our coverage. 3 topics I wanted to touch on briefly with regard to the ACA. And the first is that we do and have already experienced coverage changes as mandated by that law. For example, coverage has been increased to dependents up to age 26 without regard to their status. They don't have to be in college. And so the federal government has already come in and told us some specifics we have to have with regard to our plan.
Isn't that one already?
That one's already in effect. Coming into next plan year, there's also some caps that have been removed as far as annual limits. And so there's some plan design changes that come along with this law. There's another coverage change that was scheduled to go into effect, and you may have heard it called the employer mandate. And the employer mandate was saying that if you had 50 or more employees, you had to provide health insurance for anyone who provided more than 30 hours of work to you in a week, regardless of status. And so you couldn't have a temporary status or a seasonal status. If they worked 30 or more hours, you had to provide them health insurance. That mandate was supposed to take effect July 1st of next year, and that has now been delayed 1 year. It's interesting some of the political dynamics that come together. In this case, it was the Chambers of Commerce and the unions that came together. We believe that ultimately this will be changed to a 40-hour-a-week requirement before it goes into effect, but there will be some impacts to the city if it remains at a 30-hour threshold, and so we continue to watch and monitor that. There were some fees included in the law. We've already begun to pay something, and I just have to read it because it's a great name. It's called the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Trust Fund Fee. And we pay...
And I specifically asked Julie to read that.
They couldn't come up with an acronym?
There's no acronym that I could find. And basically, it's not a lot of money, but that's a fee that we pay $1 for every participant on our plan. It was $1 last year. It's $2 in the current year. And so that's just another little piece that we've been impacted by. But something that we really need to keep our eyes on is there's a concept called the Cadillac tax. And this is something that does not go into effect until 2018, but it would impact the city and the level of coverage that we provide. And in a nutshell, it says that the law has a cap, and if you provide a benefit that is richer than that cap, you pay a 40% excise tax on the benefit that you provide above and beyond that cap. And so a lot of discussion about whether or not that will actually happen, whether or not that will be changed or if those caps will change before they come into effect. But the way the law is written right now is the cap is designed to rise more slowly than medical inflation. So over time, even for employers who don't hit the cap in 2018, everyone will kind of eventually grow into that cap. So I think the point of the slide is that there's a lot of transition issues. There's a lot of items in flux with regard to the way health care is currently being provided in our country, and it does impact us and our plans and our offerings to employees.
I have a question.
Sure.
Well, that Cadillac tax wouldn't vary by individual employee, would it? Wouldn't it be an overall?
It's a penalty to the employer.
Yeah.
And so the way that it's written right now, and we've only done an early analysis, is that on our most popular plan, in the first year, those who carry family coverage would hit the cap. And so we as an employer would have a 40% tax that we would pay on the value of the benefit above the cap.
For those receiving that
For those receiving
category.
that benefit.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So you either have to reduce the level of insurance you're giving to your employees,
Right.
or you have to pay the tax.
Correct.
Oh, how sweet.
Correct.
Can't win on that.
Yeah.
And I know that there are companies that are already bracing themselves for this and reducing that coverage because it's hit my family already. So they're already saying, this is happening, it's gonna, we're gonna reduce coverage little by little by little by little. And those little bits turn out to be a lot. So coverage is being reduced a lot.
So we want to learn how to stay well.
Thank you.
It's
Nice
very
transition.
unfortunate.
But I'm here tonight to talk more specifically about wellness programs here at the city. And, through encouraging employees to make healthy choices, wellness is really a partnership between the employer and the employee, because when we have this cost sharing, the cost of health insurance, just continues to rise. I mean, there hasn't been a single year, at least since I've been working in human resources, where there hasn't been an increase, to the inflation of medical insurance. And so really it's a partnership between employees and the employer to say, how do we encourage, motivate, incentivize our employees to make healthy choices, and thus give us the best chance at keeping our current benefit levels intact and helping to reduce the increases of rates moving forward. The city does allocate a budget of $10,000 to our wellness program. And some of the current things that we do is a flu shot program. I got mine in my arm last week. So we have flu shot programs. We have the Mom Mobile that comes for mammograms. We do have an annual health fair. We have exercise rooms available at many of our office locations. And we also...
Question.
Does the Affordable Care Act do some kind of benefit for wellness programs, since it does keep costs down? Are they encouraging that in some way through this program?
Or is this a Cadillac tax?
There are areas that look like they might help encourage wellness, but there's nothing specifically that we've been able to identify that is very specific. There's a lot in the law that is still, policy needs to be written. I mean, there's still, like you look at the website and they have the construct of the plan, but a lot of the details are still being worked out.
So no.
So no.
Bob? Yeah, it's my understanding that this past year has been the lowest increase, though, in healthcare costs.
Yes.
Is that right?
We saw here at the city a 6% change to our health insurance.
As opposed to that 25, 30.
Yeah, we've actually done, I've looked at some of the historical information here at the city, and, I have to say that I think the city's done a really good job of keeping below those double-digit health insurance increases. But unfortunately, when you're looking at, wages that were stagnant for a number of years, and now you're starting to see some movement, but you're not seeing 6 to 9% movement in, in wages, and yet you see health insurance costs continue to rise, even in a good year at 4 to 6%. It's still something that it just constantly outpaces, the economy. So we do have exercise rooms available for employees to access, and then we also have our Ria Vista Recreation Center, which employees are able to access with their families and have memberships. We offer some exercise classes, some yoga and Pilates employees can do during their lunch hour. And then we've also had, one of our local hospitals had been coming on site and doing some free blood pressure screenings as they were available. You'll also recall that at our last council meeting, you approved a purchase out of our wellness budget to purchase 2 health machines that will allow employees at either City Hall or our MOC complex at any time to be able to go in and monitor their blood pressure, their weight, some other, health issues, but it also retains their information. So unlike when we had the volunteers come and take blood pressure, it was up to the employee to remember where they were and know where they wanted to be. These machines, through a confidential process, you can get an ID and it will actually help, provide that information. So I think that was...
So you can track it.
Exactly, and help motivate. And there's a lot of ideas that we have for that program. But there's a lot more that we could be doing. And they really fall into a couple of different categories. The first of which is really doing more of what we already do, which is providing information. We can go back and add biometric screenings, where you have Blue Cross Blue Shield come in, they draw blood, they maybe take some body measurements, maybe do a bone density screening, but it's basically gathering information so that the employee can take that next step and make the choice to make some healthy decisions. But the next step, which I wanted to talk a little bit more about, is active participation. And how do we take that information that employees have gained through some of these programs and put it into action? And you typically see employers will focus on one or both, or a combination of either carrots and sticks or rewards and penalties. And what's common right now with a lot of employers is they will have a reward program. You can have a weight program where employees, set certain goals, and there's a contest perhaps between employees, and then there's some gift cards perhaps that are given away. Or even you can have premium discounts if you participated in your biometric screening and say you came up with a number of health factors, and then you were able to actually do something to reduce some of your health factors, that you could see a premium decrease in your next year. Penalties are kind of the other side of the coin, and the most popular penalty you may have heard about is nicotine usage, where some employers they usually start on the honor system and say, sign up for either the premium for nicotine or non-nicotine. And then eventually, they usually go to some type of testing. I've read of some local county, for example, swabbing the cheek to see if there was nicotine usage. And so it's kind of the other side of the coin. But here at the city, I know that we've also had discussions in the past about on-site health clinics, and I know Councilmember Carlett also talked about that during the budget process. There are some certainly pros and cons when it comes to offering an on-site clinic. There are employer savings. There was a 2011 ICMA study of local governments, and although it was 2011, I think the numbers are still probably pretty good. For those governments serving more than 10,000 people, 9% already have clinics and 12% are considering. And so I do think it's a trend that perhaps is continuing to grow. And the reason is that there are some direct savings for the employer, but there's also indirect savings. Some of the direct savings is that if we pay claims for certain medical events and they don't go to urgent care, they don't go to the emergency room, the plan is saving money. But we also would have the ability to run some of our workers' comp claims through that, some of our CDL testing, pre-employment drug testing. I mean, there's other medical-related things that we could utilize a clinic for. Some of the indirect savings would be perhaps reducing lost time. If employees are able to go to the clinic instead of having to take the day off of work, you might see some reduced lost time, and also perhaps a reduced cost to employees, where if they had to go to urgent care and they had to pay a $50 copay, perhaps at an on-site clinic, they would not have to pay a copay, depending on how we were to set that up. Some of the cons is that it is a large initial investment. You're talking about having to purchase or lease all of the medical equipment. You need to have medical staff. And so when the proposal was made originally back to council, there was a large investment that was required to be made with anticipated savings, that would come in the first couple of years and ultimately, look to be cost neutral. Another one of the cons is that, it could be viewed as competition. There's been a new advent in healthcare in the last few years of these minute clinics or the take care clinics, or I think they're called fast clinics at Fry's. And I was doing some research on it, and none of those existed as soon as, I think Walgreens had their first minute clinic or take care clinic in 2006 in Arizona. And so now there's like 196 of them. It's a new model, but it really seems to be drawing attention. And so if I can just jump to this map that we worked with IT on, this is showing a 5-mile radius around City Hall. And so City Hall is kind of the right smack in the middle. The yellow circle is an approximate 5-mile radius. All of the blue dots are employees who live within that 5-mile radius. So currently we have 36% of our employees live within 5 miles of City Hall. We also have 7 of these clinics or these fast type clinic sites within approximately the same radius. So one of the considerations as we look at a health clinic is, and what frames my recommendation to you tonight is that there's a large initial investment. We have a lot of uncertainty in our healthcare environment today. The reality is that the federal government is very quickly telling us how to design our health insurance programs to our employees. So as we lose control over that plan design, that's going to impact any success we'll have in that type of setting. And our employees we're not seeing that they're not able to find care in a timely and in a relatively efficient and inexpensive method. And so I do have some recommendations for you with the discussion and questions. My recommendations immediately today is to continue the Rio Vista membership for the remainder of fiscal year 14, that we leverage the already existing Employee Health Task Force. It's an employee-driven group. I think it's the perfect group to have an employee-driven wellness initiative, refreshed and ready for fiscal year July 1st. And ask them to focus on rewarding active participation, taking the tools that we have here. We have a great walking path, right out the back door, to look at having some type of rewards and really get engaged and have employees get involved in a wellness program. And at the moment, I would recommend, honestly, tabling the health clinic consideration just till we get a little bit better lay of the land on what's going to be taking place over the next few years when it comes to providing health insurance to our employees.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Mr. Ian.
Yeah, I think the health clinic, I'm happy to see delaying that, particularly in the light of what's going to happen in Obamacare. And also, you do point out that there are a lot of these quick places people can go to. I think a couple of years ago there were less of them.
I believe a couple of years ago there were many.
And our employees you had a third of them living within 5 miles? And
That's correct.
the rest live further out. And of course, that means the families are further out and they're not really going to come to City Hall. So 2/3 of them would really have better focus going somewhere else. And I do like the idea of a wellness program. It's cost effective for us to have that, and it's good for our employees. So I do like that part of it.
Thank you. Ms. Carlett.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that the state of our current health insurance in our country is well, I guess this isn't the time when I should give my opinion about that, but I don't think that we should make any large changes based on it now or in the near future, because obviously it's just a changing roller coaster at this time. But I am a very, very big supporter of wellness programs. I know that they decrease health costs for employers drastically. I know that there are some employers who are doing it very, very well and very successfully, and I would suggest that our task force, which I really support, go to some of those places. I know Central Arizona Project has a very successful one, and they've actually reduced their healthcare costs by 1/3 based on their wellness program. And it's a very comprehensive program that has to do with the communications department, as well as, they have on-site health advisors and all kinds of things that they do. So there's, it's a really large comprehensive program, and it actually changed the culture of safety and health in that entity, in that organization. So there's a lot of places where they can learn things that are really valuable and will be really, really cost effective for us. And I don't know if that would be considered Cadillac, and we could be penalized for it, but I certainly hope not.
That's Mercedes.
Yeah, let's shoot for a Rambler. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now tonight's star is back for one more shot.
Thank you very much. This last item is the asking council to take a review of the City Council Policy 1.3, which is consideration of candidates when vacancies occur on the City Council. In a bit of history, prior to 2006, the city had no written policy on this. Now, I can tell you in the years I've been in the city, from 1990 on, we did have city council vacancies, one in 1991, and actually one in 1990, one in 1991, and then later on, we had a vacancy with the death of Councilman Johnny Osuna in 1996. And so we had these, thank you, we'd had these three prior vacancies. And at that time, we didn't have a written policy, but council generally followed in each of those cases the same thing. And then we codified it in 2006 as a result of a vacancy we had at that time. And basically, as we do with a lot of policies, we went through and have looked at the policy, and we noticed that there was a couple of items that we think we should bring back to you that are substantive in nature. The first one is, the current policy has a limit of 7 questions that the council can ask a prospective council member. And I think the magic in 7 is that there's 7 of you. Realistically, there's no rhyme or reason why it should be 7 versus 10 versus 5. Depending on the situation, depending on the council, and depending on the applicants, you might have any number of questions. Obviously, you need to ask the same questions of each council member, but in looking at this, from a legal standpoint, there's absolutely no rationale that it should be 7 versus letting council set that at the time you have a vacancy. The second substantive change is when council elects the mayor, a vice mayor, and the mayor pro tem at the organization of your first meeting of each year, you do it by secret ballot. The current policy here has you do it by nomination and open voting. And again, there doesn't seem to be any sense between doing it for a vacancy by open voting and doing it for every other process by secret ballot. The council policy for election of mayor and vice mayor and mayor pro tem is inconsistent with this policy. And again, it would seem to me, from a practical standpoint, the council might want to consider having both processes identical, that you would do this process by secret ballot, just like you would do, and just like you currently do for vice mayor and mayor pro tem. And so those would be the 2 changes that staff would recommend to your policy. Otherwise, we took the opportunity to look at practices used, for example, by Maricopa County in their recent vacancy on the Board of Supervisors and in a number of other cities, and our policy matches very well with those cities. But these would be 2 changes we would recommend to the policy. With that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Mr. Ames?
Yeah, I noticed another big change is you're putting a timeline on this.
Yes, the timeline is actually in the charter as well, which is that if once a vacancy occurs, the charter has this provision that
Within 10 calendar days?
if you look at the, and I didn't attach the charter, but the charter has a provision that within 10 days after a vacancy, that a council member has to indicate whether they would, A, that they want to be appointed to the vacancy, and B, whether they would run for election, which is very similar to that in Phoenix. And the idea there is to let council know if a prospective candidate is thinking about running for the seat. Because keep in mind, if a seat becomes vacant in the last 2 years, it's filled by appointment for the remainder of the term. If a seat becomes vacant and there's more than 2 years remaining, it is filled by special election. So, for example, in the case of when Councilman Johnny Osuna passed away, there was more than 2 years left to his term, so his seat was actually filled by an appointment, and then there was an election to fill the remainder of the term. At that time, that particular council didn't have any concerns about appointing someone who might run for election. Other councils might. And so this is consistent with the charter. The other time that, and for example, you'll see under procedure, the 740 days comes right out of the charter. And so the procedure on page 1 of the draft proposed policy is directly out of the charter.
Yeah, I'm looking at that up in the purpose here. Pursuant to the city charter, vacancies on the council shall be filled by appointment not less than 12 days and not more than 15 days from the date any vacancy occurs. That means we have to select someone within 15 days, or am I? In the past, there was no time frame there?
That is in the charter, but realistically, that's more of what we would call, it's not a mandatory provision, it's what we call a directory provision, and I know I'm drawing a little bit of a
What?
legal straw
Well, no.
here. What that means is
It's-
it's
this-
basically a goal for you. I mean, it's not like a court is going to order you if you missed it, and then you took 21 days, a court's going to order you, nope, you didn't do it right. It's just, the charter has that in there as a way of saying to the council, you need to take care of this. You can't just suddenly say, oops, we're not going to try filling the vacancy.
But this means we need to actually appoint someone.
You would
In
appoint
12
some-
days, and that means they have to have their applications in.
Well, the way that this would work would be if a seat became vacant, the city council would then, from the date of the vacancy, the city would put out a notice that the seat is vacant. Prospective candidates would have to simply file a letter of interest with the city clerk saying, I'd like to be appointed, and if I am appointed, I intend to run for the seat, or I'd like to be appointed, and no, I don't intend to run for the seat.
So they
Is
just,
that binding?
That is in the, no, it's not binding. If a person changes their mind, there's nothing that you can do about it.
what do you mean it's not binding?
It's not binding in the sense of, it doesn't, you can't remove a person from office for the fact that they've changed their mind. The idea is it's kind of
Oh, no, I'm
basically.
not talking about that, I'm talking about appointing a new person.
No, the question the mayor asked is the 10-day notice that you, about running or not running, is that binding? And the answer is no, that's not binding. It's more of a moral commitment. You're morally saying to the council, no, I don't intend to run, or yes, I do intend to run. But it's not binding in the sense of you can't turn around, for example, and remove a council member because they changed their mind.
Well, I'm assuming there is a vacancy. It has to be filled with 12 to 15 days. We have to actually appoint someone, right?
Well-
That includes the time for people to notice that, for people in our city, in the district, to notice that there is a vacancy, and then, submit, and they just have to submit an intent, they don't have to submit a resume?
And Mayor, Council, even though that may be in the charter, I think council could certainly elect not to include that within the policy. The issue is, a court is not going to overturn whether you take 12 days, 15 days, or 30 days, or 45 days. A court's not going to overturn that, because this is one of these political decisions that courts basically stand aside and let the council do.
So
I-
why do we have it in here? It wasn't in here in the past.
I believe that came, we simply quoted the provision from the charter. I think council could simply leave that out if it so chose. I don't think it changes the policy at all. I think you could certainly leave that out and just leave that new language out.
It's a reference in the charter if we want.
Yeah, there's a reference to the charter. I think in fact, I would recommend that you consider just, after the word where it says occur, just delete the rest of this in its entirety, that the next sentence, because realistically, if you have an application process, you're going to likely have the 10 days. Council's going to want to look at those, and we're going to have to schedule a meeting, and I could very easily see it taking 30 days, for example, from the time a vacancy occurred before you actually fill it.
I don't like 30 days, but I thought, 12 might not be long enough. It has to be processed, it has to be collected, it has to be distributed to us.
And I think
So
council.
if we just leave that out?
I would certainly recommend that you consider taking that out. I don't think you really need that. I think that's going to be something that is determined when a vacancy occurs, particularly, say, a vacancy occurs in the month of February, which has a holiday. That kind of, again, adds another dimension because it may change when we have council meetings and things, and or it could occur in a month when you have a National League of Cities Conference and League of Arizona Cities. And again, all those types of things can kind of affect that, and I think you just deal with that if and when a vacancy ever occurs.
It seems to be the logical thing, just take that provision out of the,
Yeah, it wasn't in the policy before.
oh, okay.
I need a little bit of clarification here. I've got numerous documents, and I'm not sure which ones you're looking at. I've got the council policy dated 2007, and then I have that same policy that is marked up with
Yes.
changes, recommended changes. I also have an Article 2 of the council. That's the only thing that I find that has 12 days. These other items, the marked up items has 10 days. So I just need a little clarification
Yeah.
so I
Okay.
can follow along.
Oh, yes.
I need
Okay.
that, too.
The first item is marked CP 1-3.
Right,
That
that's your
is the
marked up one.
That is the non-marked up one, the clean one.
Non-marked up one.
That is just your current council policy. That is just what it is today.
Right.
The marked up version is the current council policy with the suggested changes.
Got it?
And that's why it's marked up just to show the suggested changes. All the other suggested changes that you'll see is we made a number of language changes where the syntax is actually poor grammar, and we corrected the grammar.
Where are you finding, so in the first paragraph where it says purpose, you're talking about appointment not less than 12 days, but then down here where it says city charter requires 10 days, you're not changing that.
Well, the
10
pursuant was an addition, and I'm recommending that was an addition. What the city charter says is, the city charter simply says, within 10 days following a vacancy, candidates must file a letter with the city clerk indicating their intent to run. It doesn't say you're going to make the appointment, it just says what we did in each time we had a vacancy, we immediately posted a notice that we had a vacancy, and we immediately made the public aware that we had this vacancy and you needed to file a notice with the clerk indicating your intent to run.
The
And
application's closed on the
in,
11th day.
in that initial 10-day notice, there wasn't even your formal application. It was just, I intend to run for the seat. It was just a letter, I intend to run for the seat, or no, I don't intend to run for the seat.
And they can follow up with more
Then they would
documentation.
follow up with an application, and then the applications would be provided to the council for review, and generally that would be when we would set the interviews, because quite honestly, the last time we had a vacancy, the applications were provided to the council, and at that time it was Mayor Keegan. We sat down with Mayor Keegan and said, okay, everybody has the applications. The mayor said, I'd like to check with the council and find out when they'd like to do interviews, and then the mayor checked with the council and said, hey, there are 3 dates available, let's set those dates for the interviews. And I would anticipate the same process would happen again in the future. Who's ever mayor, after we got the applications in, the city clerk, myself, would sit down with the mayor and say, okay, we got the applications in, would you like those distributed? And by the way, mayor, when would you like to do interviews?
Okay, in this,
But it continues.
right now, it says that somebody leaves office, you've got 10 days to apply for that seat.
Yeah,
And
sure.
then it also says that, by letter, and then it also says within 10 days following the vacancy, you have to have an application with the city clerk. Now, is the letter of intent the application? Or is the application more extensive?
The
If the
applica-
application's more extensive, then maybe you better make it within 20 calendar days.
Mayor, council.
For number 2 there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, yeah, I think
Yeah.
this is
I-
confusing.
My recommendation would be that you treat those two as separate. I think the intent here was that, and that's a great change. I think what you might want to do is to say that the letter of intent is just that. It's a letter of intent saying, I don't intend to run again. And then the application would be a more detailed document that we would probably take the board and commission application and just modify it slightly for a council member. And so what you might want to do is
Shouldn't
then,
it say within 10 days following the close of applications? Then
yeah,
you
the
must-
close of the letter of intent
Letter
period,
of intent.
you would file the application.
Or we could make it 20 days, as you said.
Yeah, well, 10 days you have 10 days to file your letter, and then after that 10-day period expires, you have 10 days to get your application,
So it's
To
a
get
total of 20.
materials.
for a
yeah.
total of 20.
If you want, I guess you wouldn't have to, but you wouldn't have a good chance if you just said, I want to be appointed, right?
And so I certainly can make that change. And then I'm happy to answer any other questions the council has.
It continues with that 10 calendar days, so we want to correct that. That's 10 following the intent.
And yes, and if you look at number 3, the 10 calendar days following receipt of the applications by the mayor and council, that's basically to say council members should have 10 calendar days to give the mayor any questions she wanted asked. And the idea there was is to just say, council members, you need to come up with your questions. Don't sit on this, because we did have a vacancy where it took us a year to fill the vacancy, and that can become very problematic, I think, more on the council end than the staff end. And so this is an issue of just saying, hey, once there is a vacancy, there are some timeframes council members have to comply with, just so that the process does move along.
May I ask a question?
Okay.
It says that if a person, let's see, if there's a vacancy that is more than 740 days prior to the election, the person has to run. The person has to run
Yes.
for election. So it says that there needs to be, that the next election is to be considered the primary. So if they were not able to run until November, then the city would have to then have a general election in March and pay for it on its own.
And that's correct, and that's because under our charter, you are only deemed elected if you have, right now, if you have a majority of the ballots cast. So I'm just going to use, for example, we have a vacancy that occurs, and the vacancy doesn't occur until May of 2014. We generally have to have 120 days notice of an item to put on the ballot. So if it happens in May of 2014, it's too late for the August election. So the first election that would be available for a primary would be November. And we'll have, say we have 6 candidates in this vacancy. And nobody gets more than 25%. Well, the top 2 finishers would then be required under our charter to go to a runoff in March. And that is a requirement of the charter, and this can't change the charter. It's just, the idea is, the charter has this provision about the 740 days, and the intent there was, when that was enacted by the voters, was to get away from what we had happen when Councilman Osuna died, which is we did 4 elections in a row. Because he died at a time where we literally did a primary, a general for the remainder of the term, and then we did a primary and general for the full 4-year term. And so the idea is that if you had more than 2 years, we would still do the special election. If you didn't have more than 2 years, then the council would fill by appointment. And
What do you estimate a special election would cost in that kind of case? Just approximately?
in one district, the last time was like, I think, $1.47 per registered voter.
Mayor and Council, when you have a special election with Maricopa County, that means you're not on their ballot, and the price to, that's given to us is much more extensive. So if you're on the county ballot, it's 50 cents per voter. If you're not on the county ballot, it would be closer to $1.47 per voter.
And so take, for example, a typical council district has roughly about 14,000 registered voters, give or take, depending on the district. So you could use that to say it's probably in the neighborhood $20,000 to $25,000 for a special election.
Okay. So given your example of the May situation, then it would be a necessity to have that March election?
We would have to have it if we had nobody elected in November. Now, if we had somebody elected in November, we would not have the March election, but if we didn't.
Outright, I mean 50% plus one.
But if, using the example I used.
If there was a runoff, it would be 4 months later.
Yes, and that's because the state law mandates only 4 elections for cities. And so we're stuck with those 4 elections. And it's basically March, May, August, November. So if you don't do it in November, then you wait till March.
So given that, do we still like all of these dates and numbers? I mean, if they were
To try to
backed up-
prevent that, you mean?
Yeah, if they were, if
Yeah,
the
I would like to
numbers
try
were,
to prevent
if they were
something like that.
backed up a little bit, instead of it being 740 days.
That you can't change. That comes right out of the
Can't
charter.
change
That's
that.
not the policy.
So is there anything we could change to alleviate that? Maybe the 120 days?
Not
No, that's a
really, because
county
that's a
thing?
county item. There's really, in all honesty,
stuck with it.
from a legal standpoint, if you resign in May and we don't have a person elected outright in November, there is nothing that we can legally do to prevent a March runoff. We're going to have a March runoff, period. That's just the way it is. There's nothing we can do to prevent it legally.
So the whole thing starts with 120 days from the August election date?
Yes, that's what that's a county provision that they need, and realistically, they're absolutely right. There's no way that they can do everything that they have to do to put on an election in less than 120 days. I would tell you, we have a good enough relationship with the county. Would they fudge it and maybe make it 118 for us versus 120 so we could avoid it? Yes. Can we substantially depart from that? No.
Okay, that's
James?
Yeah, that 50 plus 1, doesn't that apply to a primary, not to a general election?
That applies to a primary. So for example, in November, you have 6 candidates. Candidate 1 gets 26%, candidate 2 gets 24%. Neither one of them got a majority of the votes cast.
But that's a general election in November, not a primary.
Well, it's a
primary.
primary for the
them?
city council.
Primary
that
for
one.
that seat.
For that seat, it's a primary, even though it may be a general for everything else. It's a primary for that seat because of
Yeah,
how.
I understand that.
You done?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
Carlson.
Oh, my other thing is, I think we do need to clarify
You
that,
have to stop this Columbo routine.
we need to clarify this 10 calendar days, because it really implies it's going back to the very first day. As you said, 20 or 10 days following.
And Mayor, I'm
In
happy to
several
make that
places, you
change.
need to clarify that.
Carlo?
Yeah, you know, I'm seeing all these numbers here. You got one, this the new one
Yeah.
you're making up, and this is the one we had. We have one in the charter already. Since I've been to council, we already moved from March to November. It's real easy for me to say, why do you want to change it? If it's not hurting nothing, it's not broken, why do we want to change it?
Councilman Leone, members of the council, that's a great question. You certainly don't have to change it. The only thing when we went through, and we periodically, one of the other policies I'm going to be bringing back to you at some point, if you'll agree to hear it, is going to be district funds. Because we periodically look at your policies when, say, okay, if we ran into issues. This is a policy that in looking at it, we found 2 things that were inconsistent with what you do otherwise. One is how you handle the vote for a vacancy. It's not consistent with how you handle the vote for vice mayor, and it's not consistent with how you handle the vote for mayor pro tem. The other one was the limit on questions. I can't tell you for any reason why that council back in 2006 thought you had to limit it to 7 questions versus 10 versus 8 versus. I have no, there's nothing in the record that indicates that the council even decided 7 had some kind of meaning. I think it was just, they said, well, there's 7 of you, so let's have 7 questions.
Everybody asked one, right?
Everybody ask 1. That may not be what you want to do. You might want to ask 2. Might want to ask 3.
I'm just satisfied the way it is now, so.
I'm going to suggest, again, like we're going to do with the cell phones and everything else. Steve, go back, make the corrections you've heard from us
Yes.
tonight. Send it to us electronically, we can mark it up. If we're pretty consistent, then we bring it forward for approval. If there's still a lot of dispute, we bring it back to a study session.
Absolutely, and if I bring it forward for approval, I intend to bring it back as a regular
Regular
item,
agenda.
not a consent.
Is everybody all right with that? Yep. Sorry, you're outnumbered. Okay. I think that was enough. Thank you. Any comments or questions before we quit? Comments? Thomas? Jacob?
Yeah, Boston strong.
We're adjourned. Thank
Go
you very
Red
much
Sox.
for your time.